The day Marcus Calloway signed the deed to a crumbling, rust-eaten gas station on the forgotten edge of Laredo, Texas, his brother looked him dead in the eye at Thanksgiving dinner and said, "You just flushed your entire life down a broken toilet." What his family never knew was that the joke they laughed at for 11 years was quietly assembling a fuel distribution empire worth $340 million. And when the Calloway family business finally collapsed under $4.2 million in debt, the one commercial property they needed to survive, the one piece of real estate that could save their legacy, Marcus owned it. Every single square foot of it. He didn't just survive their humiliation. He became the landlord of their desperation. Before we get into what happened the day his family walked into his boardroom begging for mercy, we need to ask you something right now. If your own blood spent a decade mocking your dream, calling you a failure at every Christmas table, laughing at your ambition behind your back, and then the universe handed you the power to save them or let them fall, what would you do? Would you extend grace? Or would you let karma finish the job? Drop your answer in the comments right now because this story is going to split this audience right down the middle. And if you want to see how Marcus Calloway turned a $47,000 gas station into a fuel empire, like this video and subscribe before we even begin, because this one is going to change how you think about being underestimated. To understand what Marcus built, you have to understand what he came from. And to understand what he came from, you have to understand the Calloway family, a clan of loud, opinionated, old money-adjacent Texans who had built a modest but respectable commercial real estate and construction management company in San Antonio over 3 generations. Calloway Construction and Property Group. It was the kind of business that had its name on the sides of white work trucks and on plaques in the local Chamber of Commerce hallway. It wasn't Fortune 500. It wasn't even close. But to the Calloways, it was a dynasty. It was the crown jewel of every family dinner conversation, every 4th of July barbecue, every Sunday church greeting in the parking lot afterward. The business had been founded by Marcus's grandfather, Earl Calloway Sr., a broad-shouldered man who poured concrete with his own hands in the 1960s and slowly built a company that employed 40 people by the time he retired. Earl passed the business to his son, Douglas Calloway, Marcus's father, a man who wore pearl snap shirts and Tony Lama boots every single day of his adult life, and who believed that a man's worth was measured entirely by the thickness of his local reputation and the square footage of his commercial listings. Douglas was not cruel exactly. He was something more insidious than cruel. He was dismissive. He had the particular talent of making a person feel invisible without ever raising his voice. He could devastate you with a half smile and a slow shake of his head, and he had perfected that skill on Marcus from the time Marcus was old enough to have an opinion that differed from his. Marcus was the second of 3 children. His older brother, Carter Calloway, was the golden son, broad-shouldered, loud-laughing, slapping backs at every industry event, memorizing every name in every room he walked into. Carter had joined the family business straight out of Texas A&M, had his own office by 24, and by 30 was being groomed to take over as CEO. He wore his daddy's approval like a tailored jacket. It fit him perfectly. Then there was Marcus. Quiet where Carter was loud. Analytical where Carter was instinctual. Marcus had spent his childhood reading business books he checked out from the Webb County Library, dog-earing pages about logistics, supply chains, and infrastructure investment. He had an almost obsessive fascination with how things moved, how goods traveled across the country, how fuel kept America running, how a single well-positioned piece of real estate along a major trucking corridor could generate passive income for decades. While Carter was learning to shake hands, Marcus was studying maps. And then there was their younger sister, Renee, beautiful, sharp-tongued, and completely aligned with Carter in the family hierarchy. Renee had married into a wealthy San Antonio family and spent most family gatherings making subtle comments about Marcus's apartment, Marcus's car, Marcus's lack of a wife, and Marcus's general failure to become what a Calloway man was supposed to become. Marcus had tried. He had joined Calloway Construction right out of college, a business management degree from UT San Antonio in hand, and had spent 3 years trying to contribute real ideas. He had put together a 50-page analysis of how the company could expand into fuel and logistics infrastructure, specifically, how buying strategically located properties along Interstate 35 and US 83 could position them to service the massive commercial trucking networks moving between Laredo and Dallas. He had printed the report on clean white paper, spiral-bound it, and placed it in front of his father and Carter at the conference table in the Calloway construction office on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Douglas had picked it up, flipped through 3 pages and set it down. "Son," he said in that slow, measured voice of his, "we're in the construction and property business, not the gas station business." He said gas station the way some people say fast food job, like it was beneath serious consideration. Carter hadn't even picked the report up. He was scrolling through his phone. "Dad's right," Carter said without looking up. "Stick to what we know." Marcus had driven home that night through the flat, wide-open Texas dark, the highway lights smearing orange across his windshield, and he had made a decision so quiet and so absolute that it felt less like a choice and more like a door closing behind him. He was done trying to convince them. He would do it himself. It took him 2 years to save enough. 2 years of working at Calloway Construction during the day and driving for a freight logistics company 3 nights a week. 2 years of eating lunch from a gas station, and the irony was not lost on him, and driving a 2009 Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard and a passenger side window that wouldn't roll all the way down. 2 years of showing up at every family dinner while Carter talked about new commercial contracts and Douglas nodded proudly and Renee said things like, "Marcus, honey, you should really think about getting your real estate license. At least that's something stable." He saved $47,000. Every dollar of it. And then on a gray Tuesday morning in March, he drove 45 minutes south of Laredo on U.S. Highway 83 to a small incorporated community called Bravo, Texas, population 340, 1 traffic light, and a stretch of cracked asphalt along the highway where 18-wheelers slowed down because there was nowhere else to stop for fuel for the next 61 miles in either direction. The gas station had been closed for 14 months. It was called Rio Star Fuel Stop, though the R and the S had fallen off the sign, and someone had spray-painted something illegible across the side of the service bay. There were 4 fuel pumps, 2 of which worked. The convenience store was roughly 800 square feet, smelled like old motor oil and rust, and had a drop ceiling with 2 tiles missing. The underground fuel storage tanks had been inspected the year before and were certified clean. That had been the one piece of due diligence the previous owner had done before walking away. Marcus stood in the parking lot for a long time. The wind off the brush country moved through the mesquite trees at the edge of the property. A tractor-trailer rolled past on the highway, its diesel engine shaking the hot air. He looked at the pumps. He looked at the highway. He looked at the 61 miles of nothing that stretched to the south. He signed the papers that afternoon. $47,000 cash. The property was his. He called his father that evening. He had told himself he wouldn't, that he would simply do the thing quietly and let results speak, but some old reflex made him dial the number. Maybe he still wanted, in some vestigial and painful way, to be told that it was a good idea. Douglas answered on the 3rd ring. "I bought a property," Marcus said. "A fuel stop on 83 down near Bravo. I think it's a real opportunity, Dad." "The location is." "A gas station," Douglas said. It wasn't a question. "A fuel stop, yeah. But the location is." "Marcus." A long pause. The sound of the television in the background, a San Antonio Spurs game. "Boy, I don't know what to tell you. You just spent your savings on a broken-down gas station in the middle of nowhere." Another pause. "I hope you kept enough money to eat." He told Carter at Thanksgiving 3 months later, when the renovation was already underway. Carter was on his second Shiner Bock and had just finished telling everyone about a $2.8 million commercial development deal Calloway Construction had landed. He turned to Marcus with the loose, magnanimous smile of a man who felt entirely secure in his superiority. "What are you up to these days, little brother? Still doing that driving thing at night?" "I bought a gas station," Marcus said. "Down on 83. I'm renovating it. Going to add a truck stop bay and expand the diesel capacity." The table went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then Carter laughed. Not a polite laugh. A full, open-throated laugh that made his shoulders shake. "A gas station," he said, turning to Douglas. "Dad, did you know about this?" Douglas, who was carving the turkey with the precise movements of a man who considered himself the executive of all situations, nodded without looking up. "I heard." Renee set down her wine glass. "Marcus, sweetie. A gas station in where? Bravo. That's not even a real town. That's a census designation. She smiled in a way that had no warmth in it at all. What exactly is your plan here? Location play, Marcus said, keeping his voice level. 61-mile service gap on a major commercial trucking corridor. I'm adding a diesel island, a driver's lounge, a DEF fluid station. The trucking volume on that stretch is... Marcus. Carter leaned forward. Do you know what the margins are on fuel retail? Do you actually know? He shook his head slowly. You're going to work yourself to death for 3-cent margins and a building that probably needs a new foundation. I genuinely hope you don't lose everything, brother. I genuinely do. He raised his beer in a mock toast. To the gas station man. Renee giggled. Her husband, a round-faced man named Todd who had never once formed an original opinion in his adult life, smiled along. Douglas said nothing, which, as Marcus had learned over the course of his entire life, was the loudest thing his father could do. Marcus drove back to Bravo that night, pulled into the parking lot of his gas station, and sat in his truck in the dark for a while. The new LED canopy lights he had installed over the pump islands glowed white and clean against the black sky. A truck driver was fueling at pump 3, and Marcus watched the number spin on the diesel display and did the math in his head the way he always did, automatically, the way other people hum songs without realizing it. He went inside, made himself a cup of coffee from the commercial machine he had installed the week before, and opened his laptop on the counter. He had a meeting with a fuel distribution rep from San Antonio in the morning. He had a second appointment with a commercial lender about a construction loan for a truck service bay. And he had a spreadsheet open that showed, in clean, unambiguous numbers, that if he could capture even 30% of the commercial diesel volume passing through that corridor, he would clear his initial investment in 14 months. He was not angry. He was not sad. He was, in the particular and clarifying way of a man who has finally stopped asking for permission, completely and totally focused. What his family did not know, what they could not have known, because they had never bothered to look past the surface of what he was doing, was that Marcus had not bought a gas station. He had bought a position, a geographic choke point on one of the most active commercial trucking corridors in South Texas. And he intended to own every choke point like it from Laredo to Dallas. The first year was brutal in the specific way that all real things are brutal, which is to say it was not dramatic, it was just hard. Marcus woke up at 5 in the morning every day and drove to Bravo. He worked the counter himself during the early morning rush when the long-haul drivers came through heading north before sunrise, their big rigs hissing and rattling in the pre-dawn dark as they pulled onto his newly repaved lot. He learned their names. He learned their routes. He learned which carriers ran the Laredo to San Antonio corridor on Mondays and Wednesdays, and which ones came through heading to Eagle Pass on Thursdays. He stocked the things they actually needed, not the things a generic convenience store stocked. He put in a commercial shower station, 2 of them clean and well lit with good water pressure, because a truck driver who can shower at your stop is a truck driver who will come back to your stop. He installed a DEF fluid dispenser, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is the diesel exhaust fluid that modern diesel trucks are federally required to use, and which was, at the time, surprisingly hard to find along that particular stretch of highway. That single addition tripled his commercial truck traffic within 90 days. He applied for a commercial fuel distribution license in his second year and began supplying wholesale diesel to 2 smaller independent stations along the corridor that had no direct distributor relationship. He was not yet making significant money. He was reinvesting everything. Every dollar that came in went back into the property, into equipment, into the next step of the plan that only he could see clearly, because he was the only one who had ever bothered to look at the map long enough to understand what it was showing. The Christmas of his second year, he drove to San Antonio for the family dinner at his parents' house on Agarita Way. A wide, comfortable home with a limestone facade and a live oak in the front yard that Douglas had planted the year Carter was born. The house smelled like his mother's tamales and the cedar of the Christmas tree. His mother, Patricia Calloway, a gentle and conflict-averse woman who expressed love through food and deflection, had made his favorite, green chili chicken enchiladas, and she squeezed his arm when he walked in and whispered, "I'm glad you came, baby." Carter was already there with his wife, Melissa, a former University of Texas sorority president who wore diamond stud earrings to casual family dinners and who had the social instinct to always be pleasant to Marcus directly while ensuring, through 1,000 small calibrations, that he felt peripheral. Renee and Todd were there with their 2 children. Douglas was in his recliner watching college football with the particular absorption of a man who has already decided the dinner conversation topics before anyone sits down. They ate. They talked. Calloway Construction had landed a municipal contract. Carter was buying a new house in Alamo Heights. Renee's eldest had made the travels soccer team. The conversation moved around Marcus the way water moves around a stone, not hostile exactly, just arranged in a way that kept him on the outside edge of every topic. Then Douglas, over pecan pie, looked at Marcus and said, in a voice that the whole table could hear clearly, "So how's the gas station, son?" Not a question. A social formality. The verbal equivalent of patting a dog on the head. "Growing," Marcus said. Carter smiled. "Still at the one location?" "For now," Marcus said. "Well," Carter said, cutting his pie. "Respect for the hustle. Not everyone is cut out for the big plays. There's nothing wrong with running a small operation." He said it with a tone of such genuine-sounding magnanimity that anyone who didn't know him would have thought it was a compliment. But Marcus had known Carter his entire life. He knew what it was. He drove back to Bravo that night and worked until 2 in the morning on a financial model for a second location. He had identified a property on US 83 near Uvalde. Another gap in the commercial fueling infrastructure. Another place where the map was telling him something that nobody else was reading. He had been in conversations with a commercial lender at Frost Bank for 3 weeks. The numbers were close to working. By year 3, the numbers worked. He bought the Uvalde property with a combination of his retained earnings and a $340,000 commercial real estate loan. He renovated it faster than the first because now he knew exactly what he was doing. He put in the same commercial diesel islands, the same driver shower stations, the same def dispensers, the same clean, well-lit convenience store with the things that truck drivers actually needed. He hired a full-time manager for the Bravo location so that he could split his time. He drove the stretch of highway between the 2 properties so many times that he could do it in the dark by feel, and he often did. In year 4, he bought a 3rd property, this one near Carrizo Springs, and negotiated his first direct wholesale fuel supply contract with a regional petroleum distributor out of Corpus Christi, which cut his per-gallon fuel costs by a margin that transformed the economics of all 3 locations simultaneously. He hired an accountant. Then he hired a second accountant to check the first accountant's work, because Marcus was not a man who left anything to assumption. He showed up to Thanksgiving of year 4 driving a 3-year-old black Chevy Silverado that was clean but not ostentatious. He wore clean jeans and a button-down shirt. He looked to the Calloway family dinner table exactly like what he had always looked like, which was a man who was doing okay but not spectacularly, a man who was fine, who was managing, who was not failing but was certainly not succeeding in any way that required acknowledgement. He had cultivated this impression with the quiet and deliberate care of a man who understood that the best business strategy, in certain circumstances, is to be thoroughly underestimated. Carter announced that Calloway Construction had crossed $8 million in annual revenue. Everyone toasted. Douglas beamed. Renee clapped. Todd nodded along. "And what about you, Marcus?" Patricia asked, the way she always did, the peacemaker's question, lobbed into the center of the table like a gentle change of subject. "Doing all right, Mama," Marcus said. "Added a 3rd location this year. 3 gas stations," Carter said, nodding slowly, wearing the expression of a man trying very hard to look impressed. "That's a little business right there, brother. You've got yourself a little chain going." Marcus smiled. "Something like that," he said. He did not tell them about the fuel distribution contracts. He did not tell them about the LLC structure he had built with his attorney, a quiet and brilliant woman named Diana Okonkwo, who had been helping him architect a corporate holding structure since year 2 that was now, in year 4, beginning to look like something genuinely significant. He did not tell them that his net operating income across 3 locations, combined with the wholesale distribution margins, had crossed $1.1 million for the year. He did not tell them any of that. He ate his tamales and his enchiladas, and he listened to Carter talk about the $3.2 million municipal contract, and he smiled and asked polite questions and drove back to Bravo in the dark. By year 6, Marcus Calloway owned 7 fuel stops and 2 wholesale fuel distribution terminals, 1 outside Laredo and 1 near Del Rio, and had entered into a commercial partnership with a regional trucking fleet based in San Antonio that gave him guaranteed monthly diesel volume. He had 43 employees. His annual revenue was $14 million. His personal net worth, conservatively valued, was somewhere between $8 million and $11 million depending on how you valued the real estate. He moved out of the small apartment he had been renting in Laredo and bought a house. Not a flashy house. A clean, simple 4-bedroom home on 2 acres outside the city with a good well, and a view of the brush country that he had always loved. The kind of landscape that most people drive through without seeing, but that Marcus had always found clarifying. He had a good truck. He had a good accountant and a good attorney. He had peace. He had something else too, something harder to name, a kind of quiet that comes from building a thing with your own hands over a long time and watching it become real. His family did not know about any of it. He had not lied to them. He had simply stopped volunteering information, the same way they had stopped asking in any real way. The Christmas of year 6, Carter had not even asked about the gas stations. He had moved on to talking about a potential acquisition that Calloway Construction was exploring, a smaller construction firm in Austin, and Douglas was focused on that conversation with the intensity of a man who sees his legacy expanding in the direction he always imagined it would go. Marcus had listened and eaten and driven home. He was not bitter about this. He wanted to be clear about that to himself if to no one else. He was not accumulating pain and planning some theatrical revenge. He was simply building. He was doing the thing he had always known how to do, and the people who had laughed at the beginning of the story were not part of the middle of it, and that was fine. That was just how it had worked out. But then came year 8. And year 8 was when Marcus discovered what was actually happening inside Calloway Construction and Property Group. It started with a phone call from a man named Gerald Tatum. Gerald was a commercial real estate broker in San Antonio who had worked with Calloway Construction on several property transactions over the years. Marcus knew him peripherally, the way you know people in a regional industry where the same names circulate through the same events. Gerald called Marcus on a Thursday afternoon in September while Marcus was driving between his Del Rio terminal and his newest location outside Eagle Pass. "Marcus," Gerald said without preamble, "I need to ask you something and I need you to be straight with me. Is your brother looking to sell the Behar County warehouse complex? Because I got a call from a creditor inquiry service last week asking about its appraised value, and that kind of call usually means somebody's using it as collateral for something bigger than they should be using it for." Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the road. "Gerald, I genuinely don't know," he said. "I'm not involved with the family company." "I know that," Gerald said. "I just wanted to reach out because look, I like your family. I've done good business with your daddy for 20 years. But if Carter is leveraging the Behar complex to fund that Austin acquisition, the numbers don't work. I've seen the Austin company's books. It's not worth what Carter is paying for it. And if the deal goes sideways..." He didn't finish the sentence. After he hung up, Marcus drove in silence for a long time. Then he called Diana Conquo. "I need you to do something for me," he said. Quietly. "I need you to pull everything that's publicly available on Calloway Construction and Property Group. Filings, liens, any recorded debt instruments, any UCC filings, anything that's in the public record. And I need to know about the Austin acquisition they're reportedly pursuing." Diane called him back 48 hours later. She had a careful, precise voice, the kind of voice that never wasted a word. And when she was about to tell you something serious, she always paused for exactly one breath before she began. She paused. Then she began. What she told him was this. Over the previous 3 years, Carter Calloway, who had formally taken over as CEO of Calloway Construction when Douglas semi-retired at 62, had been aggressively expanding the company. He had pursued 4 separate commercial real estate acquisitions in addition to the ongoing construction management business. 2 of the acquisitions had underperformed significantly. Carter had financed them with a combination of commercial bank debt and, more recently, a $2.1 million line of credit secured against the core Calloway properties, including the original company headquarters building on Culebra Road, the Behar County warehouse complex, and, most critically, a mixed-use commercial development on the northeast side of San Antonio called Rosewood Park that had been the company's primary income-generating asset for 11 years. The Austin acquisition, which Carter had closed 4 months earlier, was the one that appeared to have broken the structure. He had overpaid, by Diane's estimate, by somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million, purchasing a struggling Austin construction firm at a price that reflected the seller's optimistic projections rather than the actual financials. The acquired firm had come with undisclosed subcontractor disputes that were now materializing as legal claims. There were 2 pending liens. There was a lawsuit. The line of credit is at 78% utilization, Diane said. The bank covenants require them to stay below 80%, or the lender can accelerate the entire balance. Based on the quarterly revenue projections I'm modeling from their public filings, they're going to breach the covenant within the next 6 to 9 months unless something significant changes. How significant? Marcus asked. They need either a major new revenue contract, which based on their pipeline doesn't appear imminent, or they need to sell an asset, or they need a capital infusion from somewhere. A pause. Marcus, if the bank accelerates that credit line, they're looking at a demand for roughly $2.1 million within 30 days. Combined with the outstanding construction debt on the 2 underperforming acquisitions, total exposed liability is somewhere between $3.9 million and $4.4 million. The company does not have the liquidity to cover that. Not even close. Marcus was sitting in his office at the Laredo terminal when he heard this. It was a modest office, clean and functional, with a whiteboard on one wall covered in his handwriting, routing logistics and fuel price tracking and property notes. Through the window he could see the terminal yard, the fuel tankers lined up, the activity of a thing that worked because he had built it carefully and honestly over a long time. He thought about his father. He thought about Douglas Calloway, 64 years old now, who had given his professional life to building Calloway Construction and Property Group, who had inherited it from Earl Calloway Sr. and had stewarded it and expanded it and believed, with everything he was, that Carter would carry it forward. He thought about what it would mean for Douglas to watch that company collapse. He thought about the limestone house on Agarita Way, and the live oak tree in the front yard. And then he thought about something else. He thought about a conversation he had had with a commercial real estate developer named Ray Whitfield 6 months earlier. Ray was developing a large-scale mixed-use project in a growth corridor on the northeast side of San Antonio. A substantial project, anchored retail, multifamily residential, a hotel component. The project required a central logistics and staging facility during construction, and after completion, the developer intended to maintain a commercial services hub on the property. Ray had mentioned casually that he was having difficulty identifying a suitable property in the right location. The right location, as Ray had described it, was the Northeast San Antonio Commercial Corridor, the location of Calloway Construction's Rosewood Park, mixed-use development. Marcus called Diane back. "I need you to research the Rosewood Park property," he said. "Ownership structure, any encumbrances, whether it's been listed or if there's been any motion toward a distressed sale." 24 hours later, Diane called back. Rosewood Park was encumbered by the line of credit as collateral but had not been listed for sale. Its appraised value was $6.8 million. At distressed sale, Diane estimated it would move at somewhere between $4.9 million and $5.4 million. "Could I acquire it?" Marcus asked. "Without Calloway Construction knowing the buyer's identity until after closing?" A pause. "Through a properly structured LLC acquisition with a third-party purchase agent, yes," Diane said. "It's not unusual. It's legal. The seller's lender would need to approve the sale to release the lien. But if the purchase price satisfies the debt obligation, approval is standard. But they'd have to sell voluntarily," Marcus said. "Yes," Diane said. "They would need to be in a position where selling was their best option." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Draft me a timeline. I want to know what this looks like if their covenant breach happens on the early end of your projection. 6 months out. What does their decision tree look like and when do they run out of other options?" Diane sent him the analysis the following Monday. He read it 3 times. He set it down. He looked out the window at the terminal yard for a long time. He was not planning a revenge. That word was too small and too hot for what he was doing. What he was doing was something colder and more precise. He was reading a situation with the same eyes he had used to read that map of US 83 11 years ago, the same eyes that had seen the 61-mile service gap and understood what it meant before anyone else had bothered to look. He was seeing clearly and without sentiment what was coming, and he was positioning himself accordingly. Over the next 5 months, Marcus moved with the methodical patience of a man who has learned that the most important thing in any complex operation is to not move too fast. Through Diane's firm and a San Antonio commercial real estate acquisition entity that had no visible connection to Marcus Calloway personally, he entered into quiet, preliminary conversations with the Rosewood Park Properties mortgage lender. He established that the lender had concerns about Calloway Construction's covenant compliance. He made it known through the acquisition entity that there was a qualified buyer prepared to move quickly on the property if it came to market. He simultaneously retained a private commercial intelligence firm to monitor Calloway Construction's financial position in real time, watching the bank covenant ratio the way a doctor watches a patient's vital signs. During this entire period, Marcus attended Christmas dinner at his parents' house. He ate Patricia's tamales. He listened to Carter talk about the San Antonio Spurs and a new municipal bid. Carter looked slightly more tired than the year before, slightly less expansive in his storytelling. Douglas looked older, and Marcus noticed for the first time that his father's hand shook slightly when he poured his coffee. Renee and Todd were there. The children were bigger. The live oak in the front yard was as thick and solid as it had always been. Nobody asked Marcus about the gas stations. He was, as far as they knew, still the man with the small operation, the little chain, the thing that was fine but not significant. He drove home thinking about his father's hands. The covenant breach came in month 6, exactly as Diane had projected on the early end. The bank issued a formal notice of technical default and requested a remediation plan within 45 days. Carter, according to Diane's sources within the San Antonio commercial real estate community, had approached 2 potential investors and been declined both times. The Austin acquisition liabilities had become more public. The subcontractor lawsuits were now a matter of record. Calloway Construction's reputation, which had been its most durable asset, was beginning to fray at the edges. Carter then did what people in his position almost always do. He called a broker and instructed him to quietly canvass for a buyer for Rosewood Park. The acquisition entity that had already been positioned and prepared made an offer within 72 hours. The offer was $5.1 million, which was within the distressed sale range Diane had identified, which was enough to satisfy the lien and service a significant portion of the outstanding debt, and which the lender, who wanted this problem resolved and had already been in background communication with the acquisition entity's representatives, approved with unusual speed. Carter accepted the offer. The closing took 3 weeks. At closing, the buyer entity's name, Lone Star Corridor Holdings LLC, appeared on the documents. Carter did not recognize it. His attorney ran a basic search and found a 2-year-old Texas LLC with a registered agent in Austin. Nothing connected it on the surface to Marcus Calloway. The deal closed on a Thursday. On the following Monday morning, Marcus called his brother. Carter answered on the second ring. He sounded tired. He sounded like a man who had spent several months being tired and was now simply accustomed to it. "Hey, Marcus." "Hey, Carter. How are you doing?" "Fine. Busy. You know how it is." A pause. "What's up?" "I need to tell you something," Marcus said. "And I need you to hear me out before you respond. Can you do that?" A pause. Something in Marcus's tone had shifted the temperature of the conversation. "Okay," Carter said slowly. "Sure." "Rosewood Park," Marcus said. "The property you sold last week. Lone Star Corridor Holdings. That's mine. I'm the principal. I've owned that LLC for 2 years and I've been positioned to acquire that property since I found out your company was heading toward a covenant breach 8 months ago." The silence on the other end of the line was the longest Marcus had ever heard from his brother. Carter was a man who always had words. He had been generating words since childhood, filling every room he entered with the sound of his own confidence. This silence was different. This silence had weight. "What did you say?" Carter said finally. His voice was flat. "Rosewood Park belongs to me now," Marcus said. "And I think we need to have a conversation. Not on the phone. In person. Bring Dad." Carter came to Marcus's office at the Laredo terminal 3 days later. He brought Douglas. They drove 4 hours from San Antonio, and when they pulled into the terminal yard in Carter's Mercedes GLE and looked around at the scale of what was there, the fuel tankers, the terminal infrastructure, the commercial vehicles, the employees moving through the property with purpose and efficiency, Marcus watched his brother's face and saw the moment the full architecture of what had been built became visible to him. Marcus met them in the parking lot. He was wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt, the same kind of thing he always wore. He shook his father's hand first. Douglas's grip was still firm, but his eyes, when they met Marcus's, had something in them that Marcus had never seen there before. Something that looked uncomfortably like the beginning of recognition. He shook Carter's hand. Carter looked like a man who had not slept well in several months and who had, in the last 3 days, slept even less than that. "Come inside," Marcus said. He walked them through the terminal building, not grandly, not as a performance, just showing them where things were. The operations center, the dispatch systems, the fuel pricing monitors, the wall of the conference room where Diane had prepared a 1-page overview of the Calloway Fuel and Logistics Group, which was the holding company name Marcus had given his empire in year 7, $340 million in assets, 14 fuel and travel center locations, 2 wholesale distribution terminals, 43 direct employees, and a network of 18 contracted logistics partners. He poured them coffee from the same commercial machine he had bought for the Bravo location in year 1. He sat across from them at the conference table. Douglas had not said anything since they arrived. He was looking at the overview document. His reading glasses were on. His hands, Marcus noticed, were not shaking now. They were flat and still on the table. "Dad," Marcus said, "I know this is a lot to take in." Douglas looked up. Something moved across his face that was complicated and slow. "You built all this," Douglas said. "Yes, sir." "While we were," he stopped. "While you were running your business," Marcus said. Carefully. Without cruelty. "Yes." Carter had been staring at the table. Now he looked up. "So what is this?" he said. His voice was tight. What is this? You're showing us this to make a point? To say I told you so?" "No," Marcus said. "I'm showing you this because you need to understand who you're talking to when we discuss Rosewood Park. And we need to discuss Rosewood Park, Carter, because your company's survival right now depends on what I decide to do with it." The room was very quiet. Outside the window, a fuel tanker was pulling out of the yard, its engine low and steady. Carter's jaw was tight. "You could have told us," he said. "Years ago. You could have. We had no idea you were." "Would it have mattered?" Marcus said. He said it without anger. He said it the way you state a fact about the weather. Carter didn't answer, because they both knew the answer. It would not have mattered. Not in the early years when Marcus had been the gas station joke. Not in the middle years when Marcus had been the man with the little chain. Not until the number on the overview document made it impossible to dismiss. Douglas Calloway took off his reading glasses. He folded them carefully and set them on the table. He looked at his son, the quiet one, the one who had been handed a spiral-bound business proposal and had been told, with a slow shake of the head and 2 words, that it was the wrong business. "Marcus," Douglas said. His voice was different from any voice Marcus had ever heard from him. It was not the dismissive voice. It was not the paternal executive voice. It was something older and quieter and without any performance in it at all. "Son, I owe you an apology that I should have given you a long time ago." Marcus looked at his father for a long moment. Then he nodded. One nod. Slow. Acknowledgement without theater. "Here is what I'm going to do," Marcus said, turning back to Carter. "Rosewood Park. I'm not going to sell it back to you. I can't do that, and I won't, because the honest truth is that the Ray Whitfield development project needs that property, and it's going to generate significant value for my company in a partnership that I've been building for 8 months. I can't undo that, and I wouldn't." Carter's face tightened. "What I can do," Marcus said, "is offer Calloway Construction a long-term commercial lease on the warehouse component of the Rosewood Park property at fair market rate. Not charity. Fair market. That lease revenue, if structured correctly with your remaining assets, gives you a stable income stream that services your remaining debt obligations without requiring a fire sale of anything else. You'd also get preferred vendor status on the construction phase of the Whitfield development, which is a $22 million project, and which, if Calloway Construction performs, would be the biggest municipal adjacent contract the company has ever touched." Carter stared at him. "You're serious?" "I don't say things I don't mean," Marcus said. I never have. A long silence. Then Carter said, and his voice had something in it that Marcus had never heard from his brother either. Something stripped of the performance. Something that sounded like the actual man underneath all the years of Golden Sun confidence. Why would you do that? After everything. Why would you help us? Marcus looked at his brother. He looked at his father. He thought about Patricia Calloway in the kitchen on Agarita Way, squeezing his arm and saying, I'm glad you came, baby. He thought about the live oak tree in the front yard. Because this family built something before I built something, Marcus said. And I'm not interested in watching it collapse when I have the means to prevent it. But I'm going to be honest with you both about something. He paused. He let the pause be what it was. What I built because you told me I couldn't. And every time I wanted to quit, which was more times than I'm going to tell you about, I thought about that Thanksgiving table and I kept going. So in a way you helped me build this too. Just not in the way you intended. The drive to San Antonio that afternoon, the one Carter and Douglas made back through the long flat South Texas landscape, Marcus did not take. He had a call with Ray Whitfield at 4 o'clock and a fuel pricing review at 5. He had a staff meeting in the morning and a property acquisition analysis to review before the end of the week. He made his coffee. He went back to work. The Calloway construction deal was structured over the following 6 weeks by Diane Okonkwo and a team of commercial real estate attorneys. The lease on the Rosewood Park warehouse component was executed at $24,000 per month, fair market rate as Marcus had said, not a dollar below and not a dollar above. The preferred vendor agreement for the Whitfield development construction phase was executed simultaneously. Carter signed both documents in Diane's San Antonio office on a Tuesday morning. He did not bring his father. He came alone, which Marcus thought was probably the right choice. The legal work on the documents took 4 hours. When it was done, Carter sat at the conference table for a moment before gathering his copies. He looked at Diane, who had the professional neutrality of a person who has seen every variety of human business situation, and maintained her composure through all of them. Then he looked at the documents in his hand. The letterhead of Lone Star Corridor Holdings LLC. The signature line where Marcus James Calloway had signed his name in clean, unhurried handwriting. Carter said nothing. He picked up his briefcase and he walked out. What happened after was not a sudden transformation of the Calloway family. These things never worked that way in real life, and Marcus knew enough about real things to understand that. There was no dramatic tearful reconciliation scene at Christmas. There was no moment where Renee gave a speech about how wrong she had been. Douglas did not call Marcus on a Sunday morning and deliver a formal acknowledgement of all the years of dismissal. Real families do not operate like that. Real families are slow and awkward, and they carry their histories the way old buildings carry their original foundations, even when they build new floors on top. What happened was quieter than that. Douglas began calling Marcus on Sunday evenings. Not long calls. 15 minutes, sometimes 20. He asked about the business, real questions, the kind of questions that required Marcus to explain what he was actually doing and why it worked. He listened. He did not offer advice. He asked follow-up questions. This was for Douglas Calloway, who had spent his entire adult life offering advice and never asking follow-up questions, a profound adjustment. Marcus understood it for what it was. Carter came to Laredo once, 3 months after the document signing, on the pretense of a site visit for the Whitfield project. He walked the Rosewood Park property with Marcus and a Whitfield project manager. He was professional and competent, and Marcus was reminded watching him work that Carter was genuinely good at construction management. He had always been good at the actual thing. The problems had been in the financing decisions, in the overreach, in the particular blindness that comes from being told your whole life that you are the right answer to every question. At the end of the site visit, when the project manager had gone back to his car, Carter stood in the parking lot of Rosewood Park in the late afternoon San Antonio light and looked at the property. "This is going to be a good project," Carter said. "It is," Marcus agreed. A pause. Carter put his hands in his pockets. "I owe you something," he said. "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said. "The lease terms are the terms. The vendor contract is the contract. We're even." Carter shook his head slowly. "That's not what I mean." He was quiet for a moment. "You were right. 11 years ago, when you put that report in front of Dad and me, about the corridor infrastructure, about the location strategy. You were right and we didn't even look at it. I didn't even pick it up. No, Marcus said. You didn't. Another pause. I'm sorry for that, Carter said. Marcus looked at his brother. At the gray that had come into his hair. At the particular tiredness that had settled into his face over the last year. The kind that doesn't go away quickly. He thought about the 11 Thanksgivings. He thought about the mock toast with the Shiner Bock. He thought about the phrase, the gas station man, and the table that had laughed. I know you are, Marcus said. And he meant it. And that was enough. Renee took longer. Renee operated on a different timeline, the way people do when their identity has been more deeply invested in a particular narrative. 4 years, the narrative had been that Carter was the success and Marcus was the cautionary tale. And that narrative had been part of how Renee understood the shape of her own family and her own place within it. When the narrative changed, she needed time to find a new orientation. She called Marcus on a Tuesday in March, 8 months after the Rosewood Park closing. The call was ostensibly about a family birthday gathering for Douglas. But partway through the logistics she stopped and said, Marcus, I need to say something. Okay, he said. I was unkind to you, she said. For a long time. Those comments at dinners. The way I talked about the gas station. I was unkind and I was wrong and I'm sorry. Marcus was in his truck, pulled over on the side of a highway outside Eagle Pass, watching the brush country move in the afternoon wind. The mesquite trees he had been looking at for 11 years. I appreciate that, Renee, he said. I mean it, she said. I know you do, he said. The family birthday for Douglas was at the house on Agarita Way. Patricia made tamales. The live oak in the front yard was enormous, thick and old and certain of itself. Douglas came outside while Marcus was standing in the yard looking at it, the way he always had. Douglas stood next to him and they looked at it together for a while. Your grandfather planted this tree the year I was born, Douglas said. I know, Marcus said. I planted the one in the backyard the year you were born, Douglas said. Marcus looked at him. Go look at it, Douglas said. Marcus walked around the side of the house to the backyard. There was a live oak back there, one he had never paid much attention to, always overshadowed by the famous one in the front. But it was there, thick and solid and 62 years old, planted the year Marcus James Calloway was born. He stood there for a while. Then he went back inside and had tamales with his family. Meanwhile, in the years that followed, the Calloway Fuel and Logistics Group continued to grow. The Whitfield development in San Antonio was completed 18 months after the vendor contract was signed, and Calloway construction performed well. Not perfectly, but well. The relationship between Marcus and Carter became, over time, something that neither of them would have been able to describe at 25, but that both of them understood at 40, a working respect between two people who share a history that contains painful things and have chosen to build something functional on top of it anyway. Not the warm brotherhood of the movies. Something more durable than that. Marcus moved his corporate headquarters from Laredo to San Antonio in year 10. He bought a quiet house in the hill country outside Boerne, 20 acres a creek, a view that went for miles. He drove a black Ram 1500, which he had chosen because it was the truck his instinct wanted and his instinct had been right about most things. He had a team of 32 people in the corporate office, none of whom had ever heard him raise his voice. He was known in the South Texas commercial fuel industry as the kind of man who said exactly what he meant and did exactly what he said, and this reputation, built over 11 years of consistent behavior in every transaction from the smallest to the largest, was worth more than any individual asset on his balance sheet. He kept the original deed to the Bravo fuel stop framed on the wall of his office, not as a trophy, as a reference point, the way sailors used to keep a compass, not because they needed it every moment, but because it reminded them which direction was true north. On a Friday evening in early October, 11 years and 7 months after he signed that deed on a gray Tuesday morning in Bravo, Texas, Marcus Calloway sat on the back porch of his hill country house and watched the sun go down over the cedar and the limestone. A glass of Blanton's bourbon was on the table beside him. The evening air was cool and smelled like cedar and the particular dry sweetness of Texas October. In the distance, a white-tailed deer moved through the brush at the edge of his property, paused, looked toward the porch with the absolute calm attention of a wild animal that has assessed the situation and found it safe, and then moved on. He thought about a thing his grandfather Earl had said to him once, when Marcus was 9 years old and sitting on the tailgate of Earl's truck outside the old family ranch outside Cutula. Earl had been a man of few words, but when he spoke like a man who had decided in advance that every word was going to count. Marcus, Earl had said on that tailgate in that long-ago Texas afternoon, the difference between the man who gets somewhere and the man who doesn't is not talent. It's not even hard work, though you need that too. It's whether you can see something real when everyone around you only sees what's already there. Marcus had been 9. He had not understood it fully. He had filed it away. He understood it now. He picked up his bourbon. He looked at the last of the light on the limestone hills. He thought about the 61-mile service gap on US 83, and the rust-eaten sign with the missing letters and the 4 fuel pumps, 2 of which worked. He thought about the Thanksgiving table, the mock toast, to the gas station man. He raised his glass to nobody in particular, or maybe to everybody, to the brother who had not picked up the report, to the father whose dismissal had been, in the cold mathematics of what followed, the most valuable thing he had ever given his son, to the family that had called him a joke long enough for him to build a punchline worth $340 million, to the 9-year-old boy on the tailgate who had filed something away and waited 25 years to use it. He took a sip. The bourbon was warm and exact. The deer was gone. The hills were dark. The stars out here away from the city were the kind of dense and absolute that most people never see anymore. Marcus Calloway sat in the quiet of what he had built and let it be enough. It was more than enough. It had always been going to be enough. He had just needed everyone else to believe it was nothing, for long enough to make it everything.